Honestly, it's all about the children. So I might get emotional, which isn't useful.
I feel it. I've got a 2-year-old at home. And
do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kids who are here and the ones that are coming don't have any choice about this insanity. And if they're going to end up being forced into becoming little transhumanist robots, and, I have some precious beings in my life, and I want to see them taken care of. I want them to have alternatives. I want them to have a place to go.
This is a solutions event. This is what's happening.
After 5 successful events in North America, the Freedom Cell Network is partnering with Free Humanity to bring the People's Reset to Bath, UK.
The technocrats at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are now hosting the Summit of the Future in New York City in September 2024.
Join us in September for the People's Reset UK, our summit for our future.
Over 3 days, we will gather in community, celebrating our victories and successes, whilst continuing to highlight solutions under 5 holistic themes.
Liberate your mind, body, and spirit.
Permaculture and food independence.
Building parallel networks.
Empowering technology.
And building free and conscious communities. 24 top-notch speakers, including Charles Dowding, Dan Astin-Gregory, Nigel Howlett, John and Rebecca Bush, and many more.
We'll also be hosting the People's Reset concert featuring international artist Dub FX, as well as Presence, 33, and more talented performers to come. Join us for the People's Reset UK. Visit thegreaterreset.org to learn more and to get your ticket today.
What is a parallel society, and how do we create peaceful, powerful alternatives together? I'm delighted to be here with Melanie Rubin here at the Greater Reset, and I'm here to understand what can we learn back at home for people who aren't at the event like this. How can we start to begin to understand the alternatives that are available to us? I'd love for you to just frame for us what led you to explore this world of parallel societies, intentional communities, and alternative ways of addressing some of the things that we're experiencing in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, honestly, this is something I've been interested in since I was very small. Because for some reason, and maybe it was because I grew up in a family where the parents got divorced and there was the trauma associated with that, but the nuclear family, even before any of that happened, never made sense to me as the only solution. I felt like humans were intended to live close together in happy families in communities so that we had extended brothers and sisters, more the way traditional communities have always been. So I've been on kind of a lifelong search for myself personally about how to live in modern society, but still in community in a way that feels really wholesome and nourishing to me. So when the pandemic happened, it threw a whole new spin on that, because as people were driven further and further away from each other into the whatever all that nonsense language was, the social distancing and yada, 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 but basically it was isolation and loneliness, it became even more clear to me that we need a new way of living, which is actually an old way of living, to be together in a different kind of community. So that was the start of it. But then as I became involved in activism, pushing back on the tyranny in my local area, which happens to be New Mexico and happens to be one of the most tyrannical states in the United States throughout the pandemic, it also became clear to me as I became more and more immersed in activism that there are 2 wings of the eagle flying us towards freedom. And one is holding the line on what they're trying to roll over on us. And the other wing of the bird at the same time is building the new future, because we can't just resist. In fact, as time is going on, I'm transitioning more into what needs to be built. What is this new future outside of this centralized, tyrannical, authoritarian, turn your mind and your life and your money and your children over to the government way of doing things? And so that's how I became more and more interested in parallel society. So let me pause there, and then you can ask me the next logical question.
Well, we're very similar in the sense that we see that two wings. I think they're inseparable in a way. That resistance, and we call it resist and rebuild. That's our kind of strategy. And there's a third layer of responsibility, because there's a cultural dimension to this, and how we bring that as a philosophy. How do we instill the values of freedom again? But I'm with you, and we're increasingly looking kind of an 80-20 split. It's 20% of our time resisting. And Derek told me a fascinating story about a town in Mexico where the cartel had essentially control over it, and they were, logging and, just butchering the forests, and it's to such an extent that it destroyed the ecology of the area. And the water stream started to change, and it affected their water supply. So 13 ladies actually stormed the road, and they stopped the truckers from leaving. And there's a whole long story, but long story short, they actually got rid of the cartel. But what that then enabled them to do was to start to consider how they would run their town again. So to me, that is a powerful story that illustrates the need for both, because it's very difficult to build the new once you've got, the loggers at your door. So we need to form a barrier, but then we have to look forward. And I think the parallel society piece is so powerful in that creative thinking and how we move forward, bringing together community. So I'd love to hear in your definition, what for people who are coming across this for the first time, what's the essence of a parallel society to you? What do you think that really means?
Well, I should have his name in front of me. That term was actually coined by a Catholic priest in Czechoslovakia in the late 60s or early 1970s. Václav.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have his name in front of me. But in Czechoslovakia at that time, there was a huge amount of oppression. And the artist community started creating an alternative society within the society. And then he broadened that term to include all of society. So the idea is that we don't create something new by fighting against something old, that we create something new by making a better situation that is obviously so much better than the old situation, that people just willingly leave that and come to the new situation. So that's the concept of the parallel society. It doesn't resist a government, try to overthrow a government. It says, let's just build our own thing. And if we look at it, it's so easy to see in technology that, people started with whatever it was, reel-to-reel audio things, and then cassettes came out, and then that was better. So people just left the old technology, and then CDs came out, and that was better, and they left the old technology. And now, so it's an example of that we're all familiar with somebody building a better mousetrap and then leaving the old mousetraps behind. And so why can't we do that with our society as well?
And I love that. And in Czechoslovakia, they call it parallel policy. It's a really fascinating thing to read about, actually, is the history of these concepts. And I think that piece that comes forward for me is how it connects with the wider society, because almost when you talk about parallel societies, it can create the impression in one's mind that it's this separate thing, completely separate from all your friends and family. And that suddenly feels like a commitment to leave what you know behind. And I've talked to some of the participants here that they live in a beautiful part of the world, but it's very oppressive right now. It's tyrannical. But they don't want to leave their friends and that beautiful environment behind. So they've got to figure out a way to adapt and evolve.
Right.
This, to me, sounds like one of those solutions that you can actually start to think, how can we get creative? Because as you were speaking, it's almost entrepreneurial spirits.
Yes. And go back and forth, cross-pollinate the old and the new, just like, honeybees, when they're out in a field, they don't say, well, I'm just going to go for this flower, right? That's part of the beauty, is cross-pollinating the old and the new and then creating what is the best. So, for example, in my personal situation, I currently live in New Mexico. I don't live in an intentional community. I had actually moved into one that was in New Mexico, and that one was not really very functional. So we started looking more broadly, because it usually takes 2 to 10 years, or can be much more, to create an intentional community. I personally don't want to wait that long to live in one. So we've been looking all over the country and, in fact, internationally. But as you said, we have friends and family that are in New Mexico. Do we really want to leave everyone? It turns out there's nothing like what we're looking for in New Mexico. So we've been looking in the Southwest. Well, what's a day's driving distance so that we can have a new life mixed with our old life? And so that looks like what the solution is going to be for us, because we've found a community that happens to be in Utah. We can drive in the course of a day I can spend part of each month in New Mexico and part of the month there, and but be moving into the new while we're still connecting, and maybe even creating a place for our family and friends who may at some point need to leave and to have a place to go to. So, yeah, I'm looking at your T-shirt, which is black and white, but I'm thinking that most of these things are not black and white. Most of these things are shades of gray. And I think coming in with anything that's like harsh, that says it has to be this way and you all have to do it the same way.
Sounds pretty authoritarian.
It sounds pretty authoritarian, doesn't it? And it doesn't sound very much like humankind, right? Because each of us is different. Each of us has a different situation. Each of us has a different tolerance, a sensibility, needs, whatever. We're each of us different, like snowflakes or flowers. So that way of moving, and that's why it's the idea of parallel society. It goes along with, not separate.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I'd like to draw out. So the individual journey I'd like to come back to because I think that's important. But you've been talking about intentional communities. And again, that's another term where I think people can have misconceptions about.
Surely.
Could you first outline what you believe to be an intentional community and perhaps outline some of the common misconceptions or myths that come with that?
Sure. So there's actually a website, if people are interested, the Foundation for Intentional Community, which is, I believe it's ic.org. So they have a good definition on there. And I would say, my definition of intentional community, I'm not an expert on intentional communities. So I go with their definition, which is that, and I'm paraphrasing, but a group of people that are usually cohabitating in some sense on some piece of land, although there are certainly other communities that are not domestic communities, but the ones that I'm focusing on are people who are choosing to live together in some capacity with a particular intention, that they have some shared set of values or goals and some shared set of understanding of how they're going to live, what's going to work for this group of people, what's not, a mission, a vision. And it could be 5 people living together, or it could be 250 people living together. There are many different scales of intentional community. So that's the way I think about it. And I've done some research on this. I actually wrote an article, which is Key Success Factors for Intentional Community for Starting and Maintaining Them, not based on me being an expert, but based on me reading from a bunch of experts what's worked. I've lived in a couple of intentional communities that didn't work, so I've learned by example that way. I lived in one for 13 years, and that was a spiritual community, and so I saw a lot of wonderful things and a lot of pitfalls. So if people are interested in that, they can find that article on my as a blog post on my website, which is paralleltimes.info. And that's actually based on a lot of podcasts that were published on the Foundation for Intentional Community website. They have somebody who's doing a series on intentional community. Yeah.
Wow. So how things go wrong, this is my question on the individual level, because we're all human. We've got our own past experiences, beliefs, perceptions, ideas, ideologies, baggage that we carry into these things. And to me, that's one of the greatest risk factors that could actually determine whether something is successful or not. And your point a moment ago about this, it has to be this way, this authoritarian way, how quickly things can become what we're already facing. We become a mirror for what's already there. And I think my concern looking at the kind of evolution of the movement, you can see some of those traits playing out. The authoritarian, this is the only way, this is the only solution, or trauma playing out in a way that's perhaps unhealthy. How do you mitigate against all those things, yet create a kind of open environment for people?
Well, and this is the tricky part, or one of the tricky parts, is that I really do believe it's an inside job. And I think this is something that Derek and I share in terms of beliefs, that we can't just grow the right food or pick the right piece of land or have solar and have water and have our cryptocurrency and our job outside the matrix or any of that, because what blows up communities typically is conflict. And conflict a lot comes from us all being different humans and having different needs and having different backgrounds and different trauma. The trauma. People call this the trauma planet, right? So if we don't do the work on that, and we see this, in our personal, individual relationships, if we can't resolve that, it doesn't go away. It's not like something you shove under the rug. On the About Community podcast, the interviewer on that show talks about how living in community is like being in a romantic relationship with somebody, living with somebody, and running a business with somebody, except that the somebody could be 5 people, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. And so if you magnify that, it's like the biggest personal growth experience that you'll ever have. So I think people need to come in with that expectation that they're going to have to do their personal work and they're going to butt up against themselves, and that they have to have that commitment to the personal work. And I feel like that's also about moving into parallel society, because there's that Einstein quote that we can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. So that's about me, my consciousness. Like it's an inside job. I have to do me first before I can expect anybody else to work on them. So maybe that's a long answer to your question.
No, it's a very powerful answer. I think it's so important. I think that's the crux of it. Now, here's the other piece that I'm discovering with this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
In the community that we've built, online community, we've got people probably at both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
For one group, what you're describing is what they're looking for, and they're looking for ways to start or join something like you've just described.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, you've got people who couldn't be further from what they want. They want something completely different. How do they integrate the principles in their community? Is there a kind of minimum viable step for someone who wants to kind of retain their existing lifestyle? Is there things that they can do to embrace parallel lifestyle without necessarily joining a community in this way?
Where they cohabitate. I mean, again, I don't think anything is black and white. And I love the freedom cells that John Bush and Derek Rose have started, because that's within the community that you live in, right? How can you start doing some of these things together in wherever you are and whoever you happen to be surrounded with? So, for example, a friend of mine who I met through work, she's a colleague, just moved to a remote community in Canada. And it turns out that her neighbors are very like-minded and awake. And so, in fact, they're growing this little community right in place where they live, and they're still within driving distance of their family, within a couple of hours. So, the freedom cell idea is right where you are, what you create. That idea is, well, you move where you want to go, and then you hopefully find people that you can be like-minded with. And then let's buy land together and create an intentional community is really on one end of the spectrum. So I have another friend who's been creating intentional community right in the middle of the city. She's with other friends. They're kind of buying up properties gradually near each other as the properties become available, or renting the properties. And she's created a whole, it really is an intentional community right in the middle of all the craziness in the city. So, I love the expression, start where you are with what you have and do what you can and just keep moving along.
I've seen some amazing examples of what you've described in the UK, actually. In the kind of gated community type lifestyle is more commonplace in the US, I think, than what we have in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of newer housing developments are kind of structured in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some really interesting people coming together to kind of build new housing developments that, are resemblant. Everyone has their own dwelling, but they're building community functions within there, so that they have community food gardens, they have kind of co-working spaces, they have fitness and well-being spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a modern kind of housing development, but it is what they're describing as a conscious community, and it's got that intention, it's got vision and values, but it still allows that kind of independence. So you're not in that. I love the way you describe that. Partner, friend, business owner. Wow, and most people who've been in a relationship know that in a romantic relationship, where there's a honeymoon period where everything's
right,
and then challenges emerge.
That's right. Reality hit.
Probably the same in an intentional community, from
Right.
stories I've heard. Now, you mentioned freedom cells. One of the key components within that I've found is this idea of sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean to you?
What does sovereignty mean to me personally? Well, there's an aspect of it that has to do with responsibility. That's really important. How do I empower myself to interdependently, not independently, but interdependently take care of myself as I help take care of those around me? So it's about not giving away my authority. I lived in the spiritual community for 13 years, and I gave away my authority. And man, was that a big lesson, like a huge karmic, whatever you believe about past lifetimes lesson. Like, don't do that. Don't give away your power to anybody. So, and at the same time, there is, if we look at the plants or how the trees live together and they feed each other through their roots, that it's not about being independent. So it's kind of a paradox there. And a friend of mine says the greatest truths exist in paradox. And I feel sovereignty is one of those that falls into that, because it is about standing strong and empowered. And, that requires getting rid of a bunch of your trauma in order to do that, not giving away your authority, and then at the same time being interdependent. So, I love honeybees. I always mention the honeybees. I've been a beekeeper and will be again when we're settled, that they're a great role model because they're incredibly interdependent, and it's about the hive. It's not about the individual, but yet the individual, like the honeybees, move through a series of roles in their life, but they work together beautifully. But it's not like they're not also empowered as individual creatures. So I just love them. I'd like to be like a honeybee someday when I grow up.
Well, I want to touch on that because, again, from one of the kind of concerns that people raise, people talk a lot about sovereignty here, but they also talk about the paradox of individualism versus collectivism, if you will. And I think the concern that comes with the hive idea is that the collective idea. How do we, and I love the way you explained it, have the interdependence as well as the independence? It's not either or, it's and both. How do we get that piece right? Because in many ways, I think a lot of the challenges we're facing now, the kind of one-size-fits-all centralization, global narratives, is kind of reflective of that collective ideology, which I think is what people are fearful of. How do we strike that paradox, and how do we find that balance without falling into that herd behavior in this type of setting?
I don't know if there's any absolute solution. I think it's a trial by fire, get in there. Another friend of mine says, life is a messy business. Like there's no, and this one's a tough one for me because I like to figure things out and do it right and blah, 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 blah. I have control over things. And like, I'm always telling my ego, sit down, right? Let that one go, because there's no way to know you're going to get it right. Like you're going to jump in there flailing with all arms, like before you know how to swim, and making a mess and not going anywhere. And then gradually you're going to figure it out and become more efficient and make a few more messes and a few disasters. And then you're going to clean them up and keep going. That's it.
It's when fear gets in the way from stopping, which stops us from taking the plunge, and we never get that lesson. The story you shared of your experience in the community undoubtedly has shaped who you are today and the work you're doing, which I'd like to come on to now. You've got it emblazoned on your t-shirt, paradigmtimes.info.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your work and how does everything we talk about here tie into?
Well, it seems to me, so I'm a networker, and my training is as an instructional designer. And that's all about going to people who have expertise in whatever it is and helping pull out that expertise and formulate it in a way that other people can consume it. I kind of think about the way like a mama bird goes and finds a worm and chews it up and feeds it into this, says, okay, here, now it's going to be easy for you to get this. So I don't necessarily know very much, but I love working with people who know a lot about whatever they know about, and being the translator to make it available in the smorgasbord of life of information. So that's what paralleltimes.info, it's paralleltimes.info, is intended to do, is to find those many humans who've already figured all this stuff out. All the answers are out there, and just say, oh, you have the answer for this? Great, let's share it with the world. Oh, you have the answer for that? Great, let's share that with the world. So that's the intention for that information service. So it's blogs and podcasts, video and audio podcasts. So I've just launched Parallel Times University, paralleltimes.university.info, and similarly to help people teach what they know, because there are so many people who want to not just share an interview, but actually teach people, what is that? Give them a fish and they eat for a day, and teach them to fish and they eat for a lifetime. So if people know whatever it is they know in healthcare, in food production, in cryptocurrency, creating alternative revenue streams, and, building intentional communities, or alternative construction for, managing heat, passive solar, all of the many things that we all need to know how to do in order not to be controlled, to have control. A lot of people want to teach those things. And now one arguably good byproduct of the whole COVID insanity madness is that people are more used to going online now to get information, and people are more, in some ways, connected internationally to receive, give, share information. So I want to have an online university. I mean, there are a lot of people who are already teaching online, and that's amazing. And I want to network with all of them. And for some people, it's a little bit intimidating to figure out how to create an online course and get their information out there. And that doesn't mean that their content isn't essential. So I want to make it easier for people to get their information out there about what their piece, their contribution to creating parallel society.
It's a different beast from having the knowledge and then how to communicate that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I created my first course in 2015. It was a business course designed to help people to kind of take their ideas and get them into reality. And the feedback was lovely, but at the end of it, someone said it's a 12-week course, but it feels like I've just done a master's in 12 weeks. So it's, okay, we need to break that down.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's an art, and I've got some friends who are really technical experts in what they do, but understanding how to communicate that in a way that the end user can receive it. Because when you start to gain a level of knowledge and expertise, it almost becomes so second nature that you forget the journey. And when you're talking to people who are still at A and need to learn how to get to B, X, Y, Z or X, Y, Z, you start there, you're going to lose them. So I think it's so important what you're doing, because as we're seeing here at this conference, there's so many great ideas, but how do we translate that? And I think what's important, it's lovely to come to these physical events.
Yes.
Happens, you can do that a couple of times a year, but the digital space enables us to learn remotely, but apply locally. And I think that's where we get practical application of what we're learning.
Yeah, that's the goal. And, and we've all had, maybe we all haven't had, but many of us have had death by online learning. Like, oh my God, I could get through another module. This is so boring. This is so ugly. This is so blah. I want to throw up while I'm doing it, but okay, I'll do it. So it should be not like medicine, right? You should enjoy being able to do this learning experience. And I've been an instructional designer for a scary number of decades. And so I've done a lot of that in a lot of different contexts. And I was a trainer all over the country and internationally as well. So I've done a lot of in-person training. And so bringing those things together in a way that's not perfect, but hopefully useful and fun is my goal. So, for example, we just produced an online training with Brianne Bernson, who I connected with through John Bush's event, Exit and Build Land, and she raises 3,000 pounds of food a year on less than 1/10 of an acre, and she feeds her whole family of 8 from the food she grows on her land while she's homeschooling her 6 children. So she's got a system that's incredibly efficient, so she doesn't have to spend all of her time in the garden And she produces this incredibly beautiful, healthy, nutritious food. And from the surplus, she trades and sells, and they get other things that they don't produce themselves. So out of that garden, with the trading and the selling comes everything they need to feed that family of 8. So we've produced a course on soil building, which is her method, tried and true over 15 years. That is the foundation, just like our human biome is the foundation of our health. The soil health is the foundation for growing great food. So we have an online course, which isn't expensive, and people can go learn this stuff, like wherever they are, and then apply it. And the other piece is that it doesn't all have to be asynchronous, right? Where you just go on and do it in your own time in your pajamas in the middle of the night. It can also be where there's live training online. And so she and I are producing now a series that I'll announce tomorrow, where she's going to be mentoring people over the course of 9 months through 9 live online sessions, which means then she can do some coaching, because people can go, well, I did what you said, and I planted the broccoli, and now I've got this weird insect on the broccoli, and what do I do? Yeah. Right? And she can say, oh, yeah, that's the XYZ bug, and all you have to do is spray it with blah, blah, blah soap, and it'll go away, or whatever, right? So it doesn't have to be all where you're just alone doing it. You can still have community.
Yeah, success leaves clues, and it radically shortens the kind of learning curve by having that mentorship, and also fosters a sense of community around it.
Yeah.
Now, you kindly shared your backstory about what led you into this work at the beginning of this. So I'd like to close by what's lighting your fire today? What's driving you to do what you're doing now? What's most important to you? What's burning within you that brings this work into fruition?
Honestly, it's all about the children. So I might get emotional, which isn't useful.
I feel it. I've got a 2-year-old at home. And
do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the kids who are here and the ones that are coming don't have any choice about this insanity. And if they're going to end up being forced into becoming little transhumanist robots, and, I have some precious beings in my life, and I want to see them taken care of. I want them to have alternatives. I want them to have a place to go. I don't want them to be forced into this. So that's what it's for. I mean, that's what the whole thing's for. I'm whatever age I am. I've lived a life. Like, if I suddenly went snuff, it wouldn't be a big deal. But there are people here that I care about, and I care about your child, and all of the children that are here on this planet. I care a lot about them. So that's what it's for.
Thank you for sharing that. An amazing work you're doing. And I want to also close up. We've shared some resources during this, but you've also got a checklist that people can download.
Yeah. So, all of these things in a way are very selfish with how my brain works. So this whole thing about leaving the matrix and joining parallel society, it's like, there's so many things you have to do to leave the matrix. Oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do all this. I just go live in a cave, right? Maybe they won't find me if I'm in a cave. So I think for my own sanity, because I work with checklists in my own life. When I get overwhelmed, I make a list. Said, okay, there's all this information. I'm getting all this information, especially because of the activism work that I do. You know how it is. Like, you open your email in the morning and it's blown up with 1 million everythings. And it's like, there's so many techniques. There's so much information about the health and this and that. And I'm getting it all, but how do I structure it? So I finally was like, okay, I'm going to make a checklist of all the areas that I personally need to handle one by one in order to execute this transition out of the insanity. For better or worse, one way or another, never 100%, never perfectly. But so I created this checklist and blueprint for leaving the matrix and joining parallel society. And I started collecting all the resources that were coming to me. I created a set of categories that made sense to me in my life. And then I thought, well, this might be useful for other people whose brains work like mine do, that if they had the checklist and they had the resources compiled together, they could say, all right, I can't do this all at once, but I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to start with the alternative revenue, or I'm going to start with the food, or I'm going to, whatever it is, my kids, I can't believe what they're teaching my kids in school. I'm going to somehow tackle the homeschooling thing or, whatever. So that's what it is. And it's a free download from the homepage of my website, which apparently needs a little bit of work because there's a message, like when you click it, yes, you're going to get the email, and you have to just go to the email and then click that link. I think I have to fix my process a little bit, but people are downloading that checklist now every day, and I hope it's helping them. It's free. So that's what it is, right? And so my deal is if I can give away a bunch of information and help people, then I still have a matrix job. That's my big goal, is to leave that matrix job and do this full time. That the more people I help, what goes around comes around, and then I can do this full time, because it's also really, really, really interesting to meet people like yourself who are doing great work. So that's what I want to do.
Thank you, Melanie. Now, we can all help by sharing this interview. If you've enjoyed this conversation, I know many of you are asking the same questions that I've been asking today. How do we embrace what's happening in a constructive way? How do we find solutions? How do we navigate this in our own unique lives? Some brilliant resources here. So please share this, check out the resources. Thank you so much, Melanie, for being with us here on the Free Humanity Podcast. Such an enlivening conversation. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
This is a solutions event. This is what's happening.
After 5 successful events in North America, the Freedom Cell Network is partnering with Free Humanity to bring the People's Reset to Bath, UK.
The technocrats at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are now hosting the Summit of the Future in New York City in September 2024.
Join us in September for the People's Reset UK, our summit for our future.
Over 3 days, we will gather in community, celebrating our victories and successes, whilst continuing to highlight solutions under 5 holistic themes.
Liberate your mind, body, and spirit.
Permaculture and food independence.
Building parallel networks.
Empowering technology.
And building free and conscious communities. 24 top-notch speakers, including Charles Dowding, Dan Astin-Gregory, Nigel Howlett, John and Rebecca Bush, and many more.
We'll also be hosting the People's Reset concert featuring international artist Dub FX, as well as Presence, 33, and more talented performers to come. Join us for the People's Reset UK. Visit thegreaterreset.org to learn more and to get your ticket today.